Hey guys, welcome to this week's weekly dose of encouragement. Hey, if you're not subscribed to the channel, would you go ahead and subscribe to the channel and give us a thumbs up? It would be greatly appreciated. Our goal here is one thing and one thing only. It's to help men grow into a deeper relationship with Christ so that we can all serve the kingdom better. This week, we are in 2 Samuel chapter 1. And last week, if you remember, we had a tale of two kingdoms. We had Saul, who had walked away from the Lord, and we had David, who was seeking the Lord. You know, David had ran from Saul for about a year and 4 months or so into obscurity. He sought refuge with the enemy. He went to the Philistines and begged them to stay amongst them. And so in that time of obscurity and in that time of mingling with the enemy, David had actually had to hide his missions from the Philistine king, and he couldn't really fulfill the role that he was called to fulfill. So if you remember last week, we read that Saul fell upon his sword, that he committed suicide, and then his armor bearer did the same thing. And we also learned that John had died in the battle as well. And so we picked the story up. David has come back from Ziklag. They've been there for about 3 days now. And there's this guy, and he's like running up to David, and he's got his clothes torn, and he has dust on his head, and all because he's mourning the loss, or at least showing that he's mourning the loss of King Saul. And so David, when he sees this guy, he's like, man, what's going on? Not only is he trying to put his life back together, Ziklag is in ruins because the Amalekites came in and decided that they were going to completely destroy Ziklag. Now this guy, what else, what other bad news could we have come up in this instance? And so here's the conversation between David and this young man. He says, "Where have you come from?" David asked. "I escaped from the Israelite camp," the man replied. "What happened?" David demanded. Remember that that David was actually marching with the Philistines to go to battle against the Israelites. And so obviously David is probably just waiting on a hair's breadth to hear the news of what happened. "Tell me how the battle went," David said. The man replied, "Our entire army fled the battle. Many of the men are dead, and Saul and his son Jonathan are also dead." "How do you know Saul and Jonathan are dead?" David demanded of the young man. I want to stop there. So as you remember, Jonathan was David's best friend. He was his battle buddy. He was the guy that he considered closer than any of his brothers. And he is getting hit with probably the worst news he could ever have been hit with. Losing a loved one, losing someone you care about, is incredibly difficult. And how you take the news could determine an outcome. So anyways, the man answered, "I happened to be on Mount Gilboa, and there was Saul leaning on his spear with the enemy chariots and charioteers closing in on him. When he turned and saw me, he cried out for me to come to him. 'How can I help?' I asked him. He responded, 'Who are you?' 'I'm an Amalekite,' I told him. Then he begged me, 'Come over here and put me out of my misery, for I am in terrible pain and want to die.' So I killed him," the Amalekite told David, "for I knew he couldn't live. Then I took his crown and his armband, and I have brought them here to you, my Lord." And David and his men tore their clothes in sorrow. Then when they heard the news, they mourned and they wept and fasted all day for Saul and his son Jonathan, and for the Lord's army and the nation of Israel, because they had died by the sword that day. I don't think this was the reaction this guy was expecting. You know, some would say this is a textual error. I think what we have here is someone trying to impress David. At least that's how, maybe I'm reading that into the text, but at least that's how it appears. Look, David, look what I did. Here. I know how Saul died. I'm the one that drove the spear through him. And I took his crown and I took his armband. And now, here you go. Now you can be king over Israel. Almost like he was trying to elevate himself to a position in the kingdom of David. And, you know, especially with the way that David takes it next, we're really going to see how this guy really messed up. I mean, this is a life-ending decision for him to tell this story. Whether it's true or whether it's false, he's about to get something he did not expect. And so here's what David said. Then David said to the young man, "Where are you from?" He said, "I am a foreigner, an Amalekite who lives in your land." "Why were you not afraid to kill the Lord's anointed?" David asked. Then David said to one of his men, "Kill him," and so the man thrust his sword into the Amalekite and killed him. "You have condemned yourself," David said, "for you confessed that you killed the Lord's anointed one." The entire time that David is running from Saul while he's in Israel, he has 2 times where David could actually take the kingdom if he wanted to, but he refused to touch the Lord's anointed. And this kid, this guy, this man, whatever he is, has an arrogance about him. I killed the Lord's anointed. And you see King David acting in humility. This is where I really want to dig in. How we treat our enemies is everything. Because as men of devotion, as people who are carrying the gospel, we have the world's eyes on us. We have the light of the world, and we're salt to keep this world from decay. And so because we're the light of the world and because we have the focus on us, everyone's watching. And so I'm going to read just a small little excerpt of David's psalm, of David's song to Saul and to Jonathan. And we're going to really see how David walked in humility. But David's not the hero of the story. I do want to point that out. David is not the hero. The Lord is the hero. The Lord is the one who caused Saul to die. Your pride and joy, O Israel, lies dead on the hills. Oh, how the mighty heroes have fallen. Don't announce the news in Gath. Don't proclaim it in the streets of Ashkelon. Or the daughters of Philistines will rejoice, and the pagans will laugh in triumph. O mountains of Gilboa, let there be no dew or rain upon you, nor fruitful fields producing offerings of grain. For there the shield of the mighty heroes was defiled. The shield of Saul will no longer be anointed with oil. The bow of Jonathan was so powerful, and the sword of Saul did its mighty work. They shed blood of their enemies and pierced the bodies of mighty heroes. How beloved and gracious were Saul and Jonathan. They were together in life and in death. They were swifter than eagles, stronger than lions. I've never said that about my enemy. I mean, I've never said, if I'm completely honest, I've had to hold my tongue from saying crude things. And Jesus calls us to live differently. See, while David is doing this and he is respecting the Lord, which is why God calls David a man after his own heart, Jesus already knew the answer. Jesus knew, and he told us in Matthew chapter 5, Matthew chapter 5, and he says this: "You've heard the law that says, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. In that way, you will be acting as true children of your Father in heaven. For he gives sunlight on both evil and the good, and he sends the rain on the just and the unjust alike. If you love only those that love you, what reward is there for that? Even corrupt tax collectors do that much. If you are kind only to your friends, how are you different from anyone else? Even pagans do that. But you are perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect." Jesus, in his mercy, was walking amongst his own enemies. Jesus on the cross cried out for forgiveness for the people because they didn't know what they were doing. Jesus forgave the man on the cross next to him, even though just a few minutes earlier he was mocking him. And I wonder if the gospel is making a difference in our lives, especially with the way that our culture is divided, with the way that, we're told, you're supposed to hate Democrats and you're supposed to pick a political affiliation, pick a specific religious group, pick a specific hot topic button, and we're supposed to be against it. And I'm not saying that we've ever been the truth, but what I am saying is, would we be so bold to invite our enemies in our home, to sit at the table with our enemies, and not because we're so good, but because Christ's so good, because he first loved us. Guys, this is the point of the entire thing. This is the point of the entire gospel. The gospel changes lives. It puts us all on a level playing field. It breaks down barriers between Jew and Gentile. It allows peace between men. And if we're honest, are we truly seeking that which the Father has asked us to seek? Are we seeking peace with other men? Are we seeking to share the love of Christ? I know, for me, at least, I've failed on this point. And I pray that I continue to pursue the Lord as he continues to change my heart and he continues to open doors to talk to enemies, because I don't battle against flesh and blood. I battle against principalities of evil. It's not if they're sinners, they're sinners. That's what else are they going to act like other than sinners? If I'm a gospel bearer, a saint, someone who is saved by grace, then I have the greatest message that has ever existed. And if I refuse to let them hear the greatest message that has ever existed, I'm doing them an injustice. I'm not even allowing them the opportunity to reject the gospel, to reject the good news. Guys, I pray you have a great week. Thank you for everything you guys have done. And I pray you have a great weekend. I pray blessings over your family. This has been your weekly dose of encouragement.